Hi guys, I'm Anika and this is 8th grade science with Allstem. This video is about part 2 of the Earth System Structures and Processes Standard. Hopefully you've already watched part 1, but if you haven't, it's linked in the description box, so you can go ahead and check it out. This video covers the factors of water safety and the connection between water quality and human health. Just like always, all of our questions are time-stamped, so you can skip past the explanations of questions you get right. If you need extra practice with specific topics after this video, go to our links for further reference page. It's linked in the description box along with all the questions in this video. On this page, there are links correlating to each question. Okay, time to get into the first question.
Question 1. Which of the following is not one of the reasons why aquatic macroinvertebrates are good bioindicators? A. They are easy for people to collect. B. They are easily identified in the lab. C. They are uncommon and hard to find. D. Many macroinvertebrates are very sensitive to water pollution. The answer is C. They are uncommon and hard to find. So if you got that right and you entirely understood it, go ahead and skip to the next timestamp. Otherwise, let's talk about these answer choices and see how we can figure out which one is right. So, macroinvertebrates are animals without backbones that are big enough for us to see without the use of a microscope. Here we are talking about aquatic macroinvertebrates. Examples include types of worms and larvae of land animals. Bioindicators are living organisms which tell us things about the health of an ecosystem. Based on these organisms' reactions to changes in an ecosystem, we can find out exactly what the changes are. For example, certain organisms can't handle any pollution. If they're exposed to an unhealthy amount of pollution, they die. If this type of organism all suddenly dies out in a water body, it's likely that that water body has increased pollution. So now let's take a look at the answer choices and using these definitions, see which one is not one of the reasons why aquatic macroinvertebrates are good bioindicators. So answer choice A says that macroinvertebrates are easy for people to collect. This is important for them as bioindicators because humans need to test these organisms to understand their reactions to the environment. How will we know that a certain organism is pollution intolerant if we can't test it? Answer B says they're easily identified in the lab. So this one is wrong for the same reason that the one above it is wrong. Being able to identify the organism in a lab makes it easier to use that organism as a bioindicator. So answers A and B are wrong because they're saying what makes it easy to use macroinvertebrates as bioindicators. Answer C says that macroinvertebrates are uncommon and hard to find. However, if they're hard to find, how will we learn about them? How will we know if they're common in a certain ecosystem? Let's say that there are only 5 organisms of a certain species in an ecosystem. If one of them dies suddenly, there's no guarantee that it's due to a change in the ecosystem. It could just be a natural health problem with that one. However, if there are 50 of an organism and 10 die suddenly, it's much more likely to do with the environment. So the answer choice is very likely to be C. However, we always go through all the answer choices, so let's look at answer choice D. Answer choice D says many macroinvertebrates are very sensitive to water pollution. So good bioindicators are sensitive to large changes in the environment. This means that if a large change was to happen, there would be a noticeable effect on the species. If a certain species is sensitive to pollution and all of it dies out, we'll know that that water body is very likely to be polluted. So sensitive macroinvertebrates are good bioindicators. Question 2. Turbidity is A. A measure of how clear the water in a water body is. B. A measure of how fast the water in a water body is moving. C. A measure of how much oxygen is dissolved in a water body. Or D. A measure of how many living organisms are in a water body. The answer is A. A measure of how clear the water in a water body is. So, turbidity is a measure of how clear the water in a water body is. Obviously, we want our drinking water and the water we use to be as clear as possible. We wouldn't want dirt and dissolved solids and other unhealthy stuff floating around in it. This is why turbidity is important. Just from a glance at a cup of water, we can instantly tell if it's bad water just by looking at the color. If your water is brown, you'd assume that there's something dissolved in it. We can say the same thing about water bodies. If a water body looks extremely murky and hazy, there's probably something in it. Often, turbidity in a water body is caused by pollutants from the land dissolved into the water. However, it's important to acknowledge that clear water isn't guaranteed to be good water. Many contaminants have no smell, taste, or color. Question 3. Identify the following as either point source pollution or non point source pollution: wastewater from oil refineries, runoff from a city, and discharges from sewage treatment plants. So here are the answers. The point source pollutions are wastewater from oil refineries and discharges from sewage treatment plants, and the non point source pollution is runoff from a city. So, what is point source and non point source pollution? Point source pollution is when pollution comes from one single location instead of a variety of sources. This pollution can be traced back to that specific location. Whereas non point source pollution is when pollution comes from a variety of sources. This pollution cannot be traced back to a single location. So let's take another look at the answer choices. The first one says wastewater from oil refineries. This is point source pollution because the wastewater comes from a specific oil refinery. It can all be traced back to that refinery. If that wastewater is very bad for the environment and doesn't meet EPA, US Environmental Protection Agency, standards, the EPA will take action and the owner of the refinery might get in trouble. The second answer choice says runoff from a city. This is non point source pollution because the pollution comes from all kinds of things in the city. The runoff from just a single city street could collect pollutants like litter, oil leak from car engines, pesticides, and other chemicals that people use on their lawns and other land. Eventually, the pollution that ends up in the water body cannot be tracked to any single source. The last option says discharges from sewage treatment plants. These are point source pollution because all the discharge can be tracked to that specific sewage treatment plant. Question 4. Which of the following EPA acts ensures the quality of water used for recreation? A. Clean Water Act. B. Clean Air Act. C. Safe Drinking Water Act. D. Toxic Substances Control Act. The answer is A, Clean Water Act. So it definitely isn't necessary to know all the EPA acts, just because there are so many of them. The two main ones to know, because of the water unit, would be the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. However, you can still answer this question without knowing any of the acts. In these four choices, there are two possible choices and two not so likely choices. The very unlikely choices would be B, the Clean Air Act, and D, the Toxic Substances Act. Neither of these acts have anything to do with water quality. With those two choices eliminated, we're left with the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. While both of these have to do with water, we choose choice A because while safe drinking water is an important part of water quality as a whole, it doesn't have much to do with recreation. For the purposes of this standard, we might as well learn the actual functions of the Clean Water and Safe Drinking Water Act. So these here are the actual functions. The Clean Water Act overall works to keep water bodies free of pollution. It made it illegal for point sources, like factories, to release pollutants into water bodies without a permit. The Safe Drinking Water Act focuses on public health by setting minimum standards for how clean drinking water must be for the public to get it. Moving on to question 5. True or false? Because nitrates and phosphates are good for aquatic plants, it's okay to have a lot of them. There is no limit on the amount of nitrates and phosphates that should be in a water body. This statement is false. So while nitrates and phosphates are good for aquatic plants, Too much of them can affect the quality of drinking water for humans and also the aquatic ecosystems. Too much nitrates and phosphates can cause algal blooms. These blooms can release toxins, which make that water unhealthy and require it to be put through more treatments to be cleaned to be suitable for drinking. This increases water treatment costs. If the water isn't completely treated, it can make people sick. Algal blooms also use up a lot of dissolved oxygen. This can cause eutrophication. Eutrophication is when there is so much plant life using up oxygen that animal life dies from lack of oxygen. The excess nitrogen and phosphorus in water bodies comes from humans. Things like fertilizer, animal manure, and discharge from sewage treatment plants can add these nutrients to water bodies. This is known as nutrient pollution. Question 6. True or false? It is better to have more dissolved oxygen than needed rather than less dissolved oxygen than needed. The answer is true. Dissolved oxygen is the oxygen that aquatic animals use to breathe. If these oxygen levels are too low, those animals might suffocate and die. There aren't really any notable negative effects of having too much dissolved oxygen. The amount of dissolved oxygen in a water body tends to depend on the conditions. Question 7. What is the pH of pure water? The answer is 7. Actual pure water cannot be found naturally on Earth. Even before water reaches the surface, it picks up particles and minerals in the atmosphere. However, the pH of water bodies on Earth shouldn't be too extreme or too far away from 7. If pH is really low, the water will be extremely acidic. If the pH is really high, around 13 to 14, the water will be extremely basic. Extreme pH levels can be a sign of contamination in water. Question 8. How does temperature affect dissolved oxygen? A. It doesn't. B. Warm water has less dissolved oxygen. C. Cold water has less dissolved oxygen. The answer is B. Warm water has less dissolved oxygen. Temperature has many impacts on aquatic organisms. Each organism has a temperature range it is used to. One of the reasons for this is the amount of dissolved oxygen in different temperature ranges. Cold water can hold more gas than warm water can, so the answer is B. Warm water has less dissolved oxygen. If water is too hot, there may not be enough oxygen for certain organisms to survive.
I hope parts 1 and 2 of this video were good reviews of this standard. Make sure to check out the links for further reference pages for both of these videos. Please like, share, and subscribe if these videos helped you out. Thanks, and I hope to see you in the next video.